combination of gearheads, John the Instigator, Derek the Conservative, Will the Builder, Sean the Racer, and maybe a guest. Invite you to listen while we sit down, have a drink, and discuss cars. Learn more and subscribe to the podcast with No Driving Gloves. Time now for the ride.
All right. Well, welcome to another episode of No Driving Gloves. Obviously, this is not John talking, but this is Derek. And we have an exciting interview tonight. It's just John and myself for the hosts.
Hey, everybody.
Leading you all through this wonderful interview. And it appears Will and Sean are just too busy with real work or something. They're not going to join us. But John, how have you been doing this week?
Kind of a busy little beaver. Doing a little bit of work on No Driving Gloves. And if you've listened to the new outro to the show, you'll hear J. Lewis Production. I've actually, because of COVID and what happened, it affected my automotive consulting business, and I've got a lot of requests and a couple of interesting clients, and I'm doing podcast production a lot now, a little bit. So it's been kind of looking at that, and I'm developing a second podcast that's coming out. So nothing car-wise, everything podcast-wise, which for our listeners benefits you because you'll get better podcast, including the potential. We're playing with some of the background video stuff and probably going to move the videos back to YouTube. And I'm hoping to begin streaming the show in the next couple of. You'll be able to sit down during our recording times, which do vary, but we'll let you know on social media and be able to watch us on the website, Facebook, and YouTube. That's kind of what I've been doing, Derek. Just fun background technical work. You been doing anything exciting?
No, but the big news out of that is my webcam broke, so we're not going to be able to have my video. It sucks, but oh well. No, basically just work at the museum as normal and playing in the garage with cars. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I guess the John is that I do have everything moving forward. Finally, everything went through to build a new barn here at the house. So I will be getting the pole barn up finally so I can move out of essentially 2.5 car garage situation I have to a 30 by 45 pole barn. So that's the exciting news. And now it's just waiting for the construction crew to get here and actually build it.
Should we start a thread on the, say, Facebook and take bets over under or something on how long it takes you to fill that up? Because like I've always said with the Barber Museum, 150,000 square feet, we fill it up, we build a 20,000 square foot building, and it seems the next day it's full. Will's got 18 buildings, they're all full. Our guest just said something about having the same problem, that you get these buildings. How long is it going to take you to fill yours up, Derek?
Well, I think it's already full and it isn't built, so that's a problem. But that is a great segue into our guest this evening, and a good friend of mine for many years now. Tonight, joining us, we have Myron Vernis. Myron, welcome to No Driving Gloves.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. Possibly some of our listeners have heard Myron's name or maybe read about Myron or watched some videos with Myron. But Myron is known on many websites, many car collecting websites. I know Jalopnik is one of them. But as some people call him, the most eccentric car collector in the world, one of the most eccentric car collections in the world, ranging everything from the Hoffman X8 to a Mazda Cosmo. Oh, geez. Gabriel, 1909, if I remember right, Myron?
1912.
1912. I predated it. Oh, sorry about 1912 Gabriel, built in Cleveland, Ohio, and many, many other cars. I don't know, Myron, what is the total number of cars that you do own now?
That's it's a better question for my daughter. She has a better handle on it. But since my wife's not in the room, it's I'd say it's between 70 and 80 at this point.
And you really, I mean, you have that title across many of the car websites that are out there as the most eccentric car collector, or having one of the most eccentric car collections there are. And obviously I've seen some of it. And as I say, you have some fantastic cars, actually, and I'll let you talk about some of them because it's phenomenal. And the cars you are able to track down and find and collect are sometimes really, incredible, one of a kind, extremely with extreme historic significance. If you want to just kind of talk about some of the cars in your collection and really I'd love to hear, and I think the listeners would, kind of your backstory, like what got you into the car collecting world and what your passion is in these very eccentric automobiles that you collect.
Yeah, I don't know. That people use the word eccentric. I don't know if I really love it. I don't see my my collection as being eccentric. It's diverse. But I've seen other collections which I would call more eccentric than mine. But hey, as long as you're having fun, that's all that matters. I buy cars that I like, and I like the stories behind the cars primarily. I'm not a mechanic. I've never been in the car business. I've just always been passionate about cars. My dad hated cars. My mom never learned to drive, but my folks told me that we lived in Greece till I was about 5 years old. And they said I would just sit on the balcony at like 3 and 4 and just kind of watch the cars go by, which I guess made life easy for my mom. She knew where I was going to be and didn't have any issues. But I really don't know where the bug came from, but it's a bad one. And my dad couldn't understand it either.
So what was the first, well, I guess maybe this is a good quote. What was the first car you owned and drove, but also what was the first car you bought as essentially what you would consider your kind of first car of the collection, or your first car you picked up more than just as a daily driver?
What was your first car and what was your taproot car? What launched you?
Well, the first car I ever had was my uncle who lived in New York. I live in Akron, Ohio. My uncle who lived in New York when I was about 17 years old was driving through town, and this was in the early 70s, he had a 1969 Plymouth Sport Fury, which was a pretty cool car. And it just happened to blow its engine up about an hour outside of town. So we had it towed to our place, and he said, it's time for another car. So he just gave it to me. And my dad said he would pay for a replacement engine to go into it. It was a very cool, really good looking 2-door hardtop, and it had a 383 4-barrel. Of course, my dad had it replaced with a 318 2-barrel. But, when you're 17 years old, a car is a car. So that was my first car. But the first car I ever bought was about a year and a half later. I wouldn't buy a car till I could afford a nice one. And it was a 1963 Porsche 356B Coupe, which I still have 46 years later. And that kind of started a real passion for 356s. They were cheap back then. They were plentiful. And I think over the years, I've had over 100 of them.
Wow.
That's a significant portion of the 356 production run.
When you're buying speedsters for, $1,500, $2,000, I bought my B Coupe for $1,500 and it had a fresh paint job and a freshly rebuilt engine. That's kind of where the market was.
And it's kind of funny. I think because back when I was a teenager in the late 80s, and 914s were absolutely worthless. And I know you have a 914, an oddball one, but you have one. And my dad wouldn't let me get them because they were rust buckets, blah, blah, blah. And now they're kind of a desirable car, kind of like the 356 was in your day. And I think to the people, the up and coming generation, I think the 924 is probably that car for them. It's just neat. It's kind of neat that unlike Ferraris, nothing's ever going to depreciate down to a $3,000 Ferrari again, or even the equivalent. Porsche always seems to have a model that is that bottom barrel, and it's going to be the 924. And then I think the next one, if it's not already here, is the Boxster. You can pick those up cheap. And I think that'll end up, one thing we like on No Driving Gloves is to figure out how to get new people in car hobby. You said the 356 did it for you, and I'm sure some of our youngest listeners will end up picking up a Boxster or 924 or something like that for their initial car, and hopefully that'll launch them. I'm not a huge Porsche fan, but I think there's a part of my heart that really likes the hobby.
Yeah, I think the 924s, the good ones, actually started picking up a little bit. I think the real entry level Porsche right now is the 944. They're plentiful, they're cheap, kind of like 356s were, way back when. There's good parts support for them, and they're really good cars. So I think there's a real opportunity there for someone who wants to get into the hobby to get a really cool car.
Now, I touched on your 914. You have a 1 of 2 914, do you not?
Right. Yeah. It was a pickup truck built by Troutman Barnes in California in the early 70s. They were a famous coach builder. They built the Scarab race cars and other cool stuff. And back in the early 70s, they had the idea that they were going to build the little 914 pickup truck to use as their shop vehicle. So they went to Ossie Brothers Wrecking Yard. And, it was in Anaheim. It was a strictly Porsche wrecking yard. And they had a Rec 914-6. They went in, he bought it. Dave Ossie, one of the Ossie brothers, asked them what they were going to do with it. They said they were going to turn it into a shop truck. And at that point, Dave said, "Hey, can you build one for me at the same time?" So he said, "Yeah." So mine is the Ossie Brothers 914, which is a 4-cylinder. The other pickup truck was a 6-cylinder that Troutman Barnes used, and that is currently owned by Kevin Jeanette at Gunner Racing in Florida.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is looking at the pickup, or your pickup, it kind of has the little fender flares in the back, and I was wondering if it was a 6 or if it was a 4, but obviously they built one of each. I think having the flares gave you no wheel wells and the, Explorer Sport Track size bed. It's not exactly a 4x8 pickup bed, but it's a neat thing to have. And I think, there's that kind of a hot market right now with, is it Smith Designs that's building the little pickup truck conversions for about 18 different cars?
Yeah, they're pretty cool. Those I've seen pictures of them. They're pretty neat units.
I talked to him way early in his production when he was building the Jetta pickup was just coming out, and I kind of like the Beetle that he's got, and I've got an idea on a Beetle, and I want to reach out and talk to him about it, and like to get him on the show and maybe put him on the spot. I've just got an idea about doing one of his Beetle pickups in a way I haven't. That's just me.
Yeah. Those first generation new Beetles right now are, I think, also a pretty good buying opportunity for an enthusiast. There are plenty of them out there. They're, I think, at the bottom of their cycle. We had one. Our girls had one through high school and college, and they're cool little cars.
Yeah, I don't think you can get much cheaper. I've seen some of the 2002s in that $300 and $500 price point. Need a ton of work. Probably have a bad motor, but I think they're a great start. And I've got a buddy he used to live close to me, but now he's up in northern Indiana. That's his hobby. He works in a repair shop, but he's always building and doing engine swaps, and he understands the ECUs and writes his own software and codes for them. So it's a market, and they're that's what's got my idea. Is my donor vehicle's a little bit more expensive on the VW, but they're still less than $3,000. I mean, for $3,000 or for $6,000, I could have the kit, I could have the car, and then the rest is the assembly cost. I'll throw it back to you, Derek.
Yeah, well, yeah, and Myron, has had some incredible, Porsches in the collection. Did you sell the tractor, Myron, or do you still have the Porsche?
Which Porsche tractor? There.
Oh, well, there we go.
Yeah, I think we've had over 30 of them. Right now, I think we're down to 3 or 4, plus a couple Japanese knockoffs of Porsche tractors.
Okay, well, that explains kind of when you have to ask which one. There's not many people that can usually say that. But,
yeah, well, the one I kept, the really kind of the stellar one I have is one of the early green ones when Porsche Diesel and Allgaier were just kind of switching over. So it was a factory built green one, which John Deere got a little upset about. That's why 99.9% of the Porsche tractors you'll see today are red with yellow wheels. It's kind of like the whole 55 when Porsche decided they were going to sell the 356 as the Continental, and Ford Motor Company wasn't happy with that. Same deal with the green tractors and Porsche Diesel.
Fantastic. And one of the other things kind of that I find interesting about your, let's call it, collecting initiative or your collecting passion, you're a big fan of Brooks Stevens.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. At Brooks Stevens, I'm a big fan of industrial designers as automotive designers. I think they look at things a little differently. I'm a big fan of automotive designers as automotive designers too, primarily because I don't have an artistic bone in my body. But Brooks Stevens was really kind of, I kind of see him. My favorite Italian designer is Pietro Frua, and I kind of see those two as being similar because they did things regardless of convention, and as a result, they really hit a lot of grand slams. They also struck out a fair amount too, but I love that they did it their way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the cool things about what you're talking about with those cars and what Brooks Stevens did. When I was at Amelia this year, and of course they had the Scimitar collection,
Right.
brought together all three of those together, and I actually had the good fortune to get the chance to drive one. But the attention that the cars that he designed, brings when those cars are out. Maybe you can tell us a few of the cars that you have that were designed by him. But they capture the attention of the car world and the non-car world because of that kind of unconventional design that he worked in.
Yeah, a few of the more conventional cars of his that I have are I have a Studebaker Wagonaire, a GT Hawk, which those are kind of legendary because he basically redid the Studebaker line when they didn't have a penny to do anything with. I think they said he redid the whole line for what Chrysler would have spent on redesigning a Plymouth door handle or something. It was pretty amazing. I have a Jeepster, a Willys Jeepster, the last American production Phaeton. I was driving my 35 Ford Phaeton day too, which was kind of fun. But that and I have a Series 1 Excalibur. And people say, gosh, you got an Excalibur. Oh, it's gross. But, the Series 1 cars, the first 97 cars were amazing sports cars. He was a sports car racer. What a lot of people don't know about Brooks Stevens was he was an amazing historian, and his collection at the time, though maybe not as big as a lot of other collections, was really of the highest caliber. So he had some of the greatest stuff that you see, some greatest cars you see coming up at auction at events around the country over the last 10 years. It came out of the Brooks Stevens collection from back then. So my Series 1 Excalibur is just an absolute wonderful car to drive. It's got 16,000 original miles. It's all original. In fact, we just took the original 1966 vintage Goodyear poly cushions off and replaced them with some modern radials a few weeks ago. But 327, 350, 4-speed transmission, front disc brakes. In '66, when it was built, it was quicker 0 to 60 and in the quarter mile than a small block Corvette or Cobra. Now, being that it was on a Studebaker chassis means you probably didn't want to do a whole lot of cornering with it, but they were amazingly quick cars. And eventually they morphed into the neoclassic stereotype that PVX Excalibur. And I guess the most unique Brooks Stevens car I have is a car called the Paxton Phoenix, a one-off car designed by him for Robert Paxton McCulloch when McCulloch had a dream in the early 50s of bringing back steam-powered automobiles and hired Abner Doble to do a steam engine for him. Cover car of the April 57 issue of Road and Track magazine. And the coolest thing about it is it's an all original car. It's got about 800 original miles, still on its original tires, original paint, original interior.
I think the cool thing about all of that is when you start diving into that history of those cars, and so many people recognize the big names of Harley Earl, Bill Mitchell, the various designers that got the notoriety. But then you have somebody like Brooks Stevens that, you listed off a couple cars there that you own that, pretty much everybody knows of Willys Jeepster. This unknown man had his kind of hand in the design of it, but then he goes off and works with someone, an automotive pioneer like Abner Doble and the Doble steam car to try to bring the steam car back. Is just it's it's an incredible connection to automotive history within these cars that you have in your collection. And, the stories that you're able to tell with them. And it's just, I think that's one of the fascinating things about the cars you do collect, and yet kind of your passion around the auto.
Yeah, the Paxton was the reason Stevens did the restyle on the Studebaker line in the early 60s. When Stevens was doing the Paxton for McCulloch in the early 50s, a guy named Sherwood Egbert was young vice president of McCulloch Industries Paxton Superchargers. And he later, in the early 60s, went on to become president of Studebaker, trying to save the company. And then he remembered 10 years before the great working relationship he had with Brooks Stevens, and then brought him in. And that was kind of the trigger for Stevens doing the work on the Hawks and the Larks in the early 60s.
Oh, I was going to switch gears a little bit off the, the kind of the, one-off cars you have that were, maybe attempts at production cars, and, just to kind of show the breadth and, cross cultural vehicles you have. You're also a collector and someone who is fascinated by hot rod culture. And I know you've got some pretty significant hot rods in your collection, a great T-Bucket Roadster, and a fairly well-known hot rod cover car that you just recently picked up that has ties to Ohio hot rod shops.
Yeah. I grew up in Akron, and our neighbors that were into cars for the most part were, hot rodders and custom car guys. Never really interested me that much. Until, again, I learned more of the history, and it's a kind of a unique American part of American automotive history. And I didn't buy my first hot rod, and I don't consider my collection as far as hot rods and custom cars being that great, but the cars I have, I'm very happy. I didn't buy my first hot rod till I was 59 years old, and it's a pretty cool car. It's a 27 T Roadster that was built by a couple of young guys in California in the late 40s, ran Bonneville, 51, 52. 27T Roadster on a Z-Day frame with a 46 Merc flathead, triple Strombergs. And the great thing about it was it stayed with one of the guys until he passed away less than 10 years ago. And it was, unlike most hot rods, it pretty much was unmolested in that whole time. So the only thing had to be done is obviously go back, refresh all the mechanicals, and paint it back to its original color. But the way it looks today is exactly like it looked with the pictures we have at Bonneville in 52. And the chrome, other than the exhaust, is all the original chrome that you saw there. I have the tow bar they used to pull it from LA out to the salt flats with. So that was my first hot rod. And over the last few years, I've gotten into the whole custom car culture. And George Barris was a friend. I hate to say it to Derek, but Derek knows now. I went 64 years without ever having owned a Corvette. And about 6 months ago, I bought my first Corvette, which was a 58 Corvette, but it happened to be a full Barris custom 58 Corvette. May not be universally appreciated, but it ticks two things off the box, right? A Barris car and owning a Corvette. And more recently, I was able to acquire a car that I'd been after for probably 15 years. A car built in California again, by Valley Custom Shop. And Valley was famous for sectioning. And when George Barris eulogized Neil Emery, who was one of the two partners in Valley Custom Shop, when he passed away, he acknowledged him as being the true king of customs, which is, those of you who know Barris, he was the great guy, but he had a good ego. But for him to say that about Neil Emery, he meant it. So it was a car called the Polynesian. It's a car called the Polynesian, a 1950 Olds Holiday 88 Coupe that was customized in 1953 by Valley Custom Shop for a gentleman who lives here in Ohio who was stationed out in California. And they finished it. It was a 9-month project, and it immediately became a sensation in the custom car world. He drove it from LA to Michigan for the first Autorama a week after the car was done and won Best of Show with it. And then it was hot rod custom, hot rod cover car. I think it was 8 different magazine covers. So pretty famous car. We're well known as really one of the top customs from the golden.
You said something in there that I guess I never thought, because, Derek's introduced you and talked about you being, collecting unusual cars and that. But you said that you had been pursuing this car, you've been wanting this car for 15 years. So is your collection, I kind of figured your car collection was a little bit random. Hey, this unusual car's out there, I'm going to grab it. But is your collection actually a little bit more carefully curated and you have certain goals and certain spots that you want to fill in the collection? Granted, there's still probably some of your desires in there, but are you to that level of collecting that, the oddball stuff's out and now you're focusing a little bit more?
No, I am at no level of collecting. For 45 years now, I pretty much buy what I like. And, the Polynesian, I wasn't trying to fill a hole. It was a car that I fell in love with. I've known forever, belonged to a friend forever. The car, even though it was built in California, has always lived in Northern Ohio. So that was just kind of on the bucket list. So when I went on a binge a few years ago buying JDM cars, classic JDM cars, I guess that was as close to curating as I ever came. Kind of picked out about a dozen cars that you just don't see in the United States that made every effort to bring over from Japan. Was successful most of it. And that kind of turned into a book. We just finished up, a friend and I are co-authoring a book on Japanese cars, cool Japanese cars. And it became work. So I really don't want to get into the curating thing because it turned into, 4 years worth of hard work, which I think is going to be a fantastic book when it's done. It's become an overwhelming project. When it'll end up being 4 volumes of about 1,000 pages when we release it around the first of the year.
That sounds interesting. And we've got a couple people that have been on the show that are very big JDM guys. And I've, over the years, become a disbeliever in that saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, but do what you love and you'll have nothing to love in your life. And that's why I'm doing podcasting now and not working on cars for a living, because finally cars are becoming fun again. I went out and actually did some work on a car the other day and it was enjoyable and it didn't feel like, oh boy, I'm working. So yeah, it's just one of those.
So, people ask me all the time, hey, you have such a love for cars. Why aren't you in the car business? And I said, I don't want the passion to go away. I was in the country club business. I managed country clubs for a living, and I never played golf. It was a business for me.
Well, John, I think I picked up on the same thing there. Actually, I picked up on a couple things along the way. Number one, Myron mentioning it took 15 years to get the Polynesian. And one of the things we always talk about on the podcast is getting new generations involved, and sometimes we throw out these ideas of how to get involved. And, the collectors we talk to, some of the things they say, we try to reflect on. And I think that's one of them, which is, sometimes the car you're looking for and the car you're trying to collect, it might take a while to get it. Don't feel like you have to rush to get that car and get it in the collection or own it, but let it kind of happen somewhat naturally and come to you. And the other thing I picked up on was, Myron, I don't think you have anything to worry about not owning a Corvette until now, because I'm the director of collections and curator at the National Corvette Museum, and I still don't own a Corvette, and I get flack for that almost every day. So I don't think you have to worry.
Yeah, well, I know you've got plans, so that's cool. And I wouldn't mind getting something new myself. But, a few years ago, I decided that I'm just going to drive old cars exclusively, which is a bit of a challenge, here in the Northeast. But, the most modern car I own is 30 years old, and it's no issue. I brag to people that I don't have a car with airbags or a couple, and it's I can still live.
I remember saying that back when I was in college in 94, 95, and I'm never going to buy a car newer than this because I don't want OBD2. I also found out I'd like my car to start in the morning, but if I had in excess of 70 cars in the garage, that it doesn't start, I got something else to run to, Target with.
Yeah, well, I do, but I'm fortunate that way. But, I'm not blessed with your skills as, your mechanical skills. So, but I am blessed with a really, really close friend who is just a genius mechanic who happens to have his shop in my building, and he likes challenges. He's a forensic mechanic by trade. So when I throw him weird stuff and people that cars that people don't see. He enjoys that aspect of it because he's done 50 years worth of small block Chevys and flathead Fords.
That's a good friend to have if you're collecting cars, even if you know how to work on them. Sometimes that second set of eyeballs or second brain really comes in handy. We get focused on one thing and it's got to be this. All of a sudden somebody goes, well, what about this? All of a sudden, you get you on the right track.
And notice, you caught it there that he said he just happens to be, in the same building. That's the coincidence, oh, wow, mechanic in my building. So I guess another, Myron, we've been hoping Myron would be on the show for a while. He was a guest that I had put on our guest list quite a while ago. And, I've had the joy of not only knowing Myron for many years back to, and I honestly, I don't even know, Myron, if you remember, me from the first few times we met when I worked at Henry Ford Museum, but then had the opportunity to work with you, as one of the board members at the Western Reserve Historical Society at the Crawford, and have gotten to know Myron and his collection pretty well, and know what he has in his collection, and occasionally know what he's putting up for sale. And kind of the impetus of this show is a recent purchase and acquisition of mine from Myron's collection.
I think Derek left us. Derek's internet gave out at the very key portion of his statement.
Yeah, right. Well, considering the car, that's understandable.
Ouch! Hey, I'm back. I heard that.
we were liking your impression of the car.
Wow. Yeah. I have no idea what happened. Zoom literally just closed and reopened.
Yeah, we're having all kinds of Zoom ghosts this evening. So let's, Myron had them, you've had them. Let's, hopefully I don't have them since the recording's on. But go ahead now. Now that we've
where did I drop out?
Right before you said what I think the culmination statement of what.
Okay, well, I'll just break in there somewhere and hopefully you can edit it, John, or maybe you'll just leave this whole kerfuffle right in the show.
Well, for the word kerfuffle, you bet.
So I guess, what was that?
I said for the word kerfuffle, I definitely.
But no, the impetus of the show and getting Myron on is a recent acquisition that I've made from Myron, and a car that is just kind of unique in its own right, and an oddball of the micro car world in some ways. But yeah, and this is kind of the show where we're going to discuss this and probably ask for possibly some help from listeners, because there are some things not known about the car. But of course, Myron, I was up about a little over a month ago to pick up a 1958 Lloyd 600 microcar built in Germany. But of course, knowing Myron and knowing that he likes interesting, unique cars, this isn't just a standard bodied Lloyd 600, but it was actually custom bodied at some point in its life. I believe it was in Canada, if I recall correctly, Myron.
Yes.
And maybe you can say a little more on the car.
Yeah, I wish I could give you a lot more information, but this was strictly an impulse purchase. At the time, I had a couple really nice low mileage Lloyd station wagons, original Lloyd station wagons, and this thing showed up on eBay when eBay was still a thing for car searching. And it was a custom bodied Lloyd made in Canada. They used the body panels, modified body panels of Canadian Mercury, basically a Monarch, and kind of cut things down and moved them around. I think we figured out they used the hood for the trunk lid and cut down the body. I mean, it's all steel. The workmanship is pretty amazing. There's a lot of steel for that little motor to be pushing around. Yeah,
it is, and it's 600 cc. That's where the 600 comes from. A parallel 2-cylinder engine, front mounted engine with front wheel drive unit. Kind of an interesting setup they had. But as Myron said, I mean, the interesting thing about the car is, whoever did this body work, this custom body on it. Did pretty nice body work in all honesty in building this custom body. And, there's a lot of mystery behind who did the body and why this car was done in this way. And I know, John, we're going to be posting some photos of the car up so people can see it on our social media and things like that. But, one of the big things, Myron, I think you owned the car. You said, was it about 6-7 years, was it, that you had the car?
No, I think more than that, probably closer to 10.
Okay. Closer to 10. Okay.
Time flies when you're having fun.
But one of my goals now in kind of, taking care of the car and being the steward of this vehicle is to try to track down some more of the history on it and, why exactly this sports car version, essentially a little two-seater of a micro car was built, and if there was a greater purpose behind the car for whoever was building it. Were they building it because they were, a shop that wanted to do, custom bodies? Was it, just somebody that wanted a sports car and they figured this was the best way to do it with a car that wouldn't probably top 60 mile an hour? But it is. And the fun thing about it, I've had it down here in my garage for a little over a month now. I picked it up right around the 4th of July. And actually, it might have been right on the 4th. I don't recall what day I was there. But, it runs. It doesn't drive yet because we have to rebuild the brakes on it, so it'll actually stop. And but I've found some weird things about the car tearing into it a little bit. There was an odd hydraulic clutch system. I don't know if you ever noticed that on it, Myron. And after digging into it a little further, it was a homemade hydraulic clutch system that they had put in the car. And the entire mechanical setup for the clutch is still in the car. It simply was unbolted from the original clutch pedal and the original clutch pedal removed. And that original clutch pedal was in the box of parts in the trunk.
There you go.
So my plan is because looking at the hydraulic clutch system they put in, it's a little scary. So I'm going to return it to the mechanical clutch setup and see how that all works with the car. But
Derek, I think the thing to do is just install the mechanical unit too. That way you have a backup. You never get stranded.
There we go. Yeah, both clutch pedals in place. That'd really confuse people. I like it. Yeah, but really, and Myron, I remember the first phone call I made to you when I found out the car was for sale, and your question being, "Why are you interested in this car?" Of course, Myron knows me well enough that he knows I'm much more passionate about early automobiles, horseless carriage, nickel era cars, things like that. And all I could say on the phone to Myron was, something about the way the car looks just captures my attention, and I could not get it out of my mind. The way they styled the body using the Monarch sheet metal, the look of the front end, it's a very unique style. And to be honest, everyone I showed pictures of the car to, whether they were a car person or not, thought it was an extremely cool looking car. There was no one that said, "What is that ugly thing?" It was always, "Wow, what is that? Is an interesting and really cool looking car." Yeah,
that car, again, not knowing the history, and it probably was built in someone's garage, as therapy or something. But it really does have some magic to it, because I experienced the same thing the whole time I owned it. Anyone who ever saw it thought it was a really cool looking car, and always couldn't believe that it wasn't a production car.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you can see the cues. Of course, I mean, we're kind of speculating in some aspects because the history of the car isn't well known. But I think from what I've been able to find online about some of the one of the articles that was written when it was up on eBay and it was posted on Craigslist, as I recall, for a while. That they believe the body was done maybe sometime in the 60s, unless you found something different, Myron, when you were researching the car.
Yeah, no, I really didn't find a whole heck of a lot more. But let me give you just a little warning here, because I used to research all the cars I got afterwards a lot, trying to find out all the history and stuff. And I remember once I had a Simca 1204 factory rally car, and it was on the cover of Rally magazine, and it was a factory car. It had run international rallies for like 2 years, and it was driven by a guy named Scott Harvey, who helped set up Direct Connection for Mopar. He was a Chrysler employee, headed up a lot of the racing stuff, and was one of the greatest rallyists of North America. Well, he was retired at this point when I had the car, but I finally tracked him in retirement in California, and I was so excited. I said, "Oh, here's the guy. He knew everything." And I asked him, "I got this car. Can you tell me what you know about it?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I know that car really well." He said, "I went to France. They sent me to France. I picked it off the line, had it modified in Detroit under my supervision, and I rallied it for 2 years." And I said, "Oh, man, so how was it?" And he didn't hesitate a second. He said, "Biggest piece of shit I ever drove in my life." So be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, and I guess, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, it cut out again for a minute, but Myron, in full honesty, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody said that about the car. And being in that curatorial role that I've been in, and researching cars in collections, and you hear a lot.
Looks like Derek did that same bump again.
Yeah,
Kentucky internet needs to really step into the 21st century. This is killing me. I will say this is the first time I've ever had this problem, though, where Zoom actually just closes and then reopens.
Yeah, it sounds like it's something to do with Zoom. We'll get through it. We're about 45 minutes in, so.
Yeah. But yeah, Myron, what I was saying before I cut out is it wouldn't surprise me if I tracked someone down that actually knew the car and said that. Just, it's a pile of crap.
but it's a cute pile of crap, and that's what's
exactly. It's a cute pile of crap, and it's interesting because I go out to the garage and I see it. The 1919 Chevy is parked right next to it, the 490 touring car. And although that car puts a smile on my face, for some reason, the Lloyd I just smile every time I see it. And it's an interesting car, and it's one of those unique stories that hopefully someday we'll know its whole life and why it is what it is. But yeah, my hope is that once I get things figured out on it and sorted, and the clutch working and the brakes going, that it's like you said, Myron. One of my goals is to drive old cars pretty much every day of my life, and not drive anything modern, and hopefully we can get it running in the way it needs to, that I can drive it back and forth to work and drive it around running errands, because it's just a cool looking car, and it's fun.
Yeah, if anybody hasn't taken the time to check our social media to see some pictures of this, I did check back, or I did go over, remember back on episode 135, we talked to Jeff Lane, and he does have a Lloyd 600. Absolutely nothing like Derek's. You really need to do that. And I don't have my Bruce Wiener auction catalog in front of me and his microcar, so I don't know if he ever had. Derek's is definitely pretty unique, and check out the Instagram and Facebook, No Driving Gloves. There are definitely pictures there, and maybe even some of no offense, Myron, Derek's proposed wrap jobs to the car. He wants to wrap it in something kind of modern.
Whoa, not wraps, just decals. Okay, so. Myron, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but this sheer stupidity of my mindset is to attempt to possibly one day do some vintage hill climbs with this car.
Oh, cool.
Just for the fun of it.
Yeah, listen, my philosophy about cars is, listen, I love cars, but, once I have no qualms with what anybody does with a car that they own. Man-made cars, man can fix cars, man can change cars. So, have at it, and I'll be happy for you, whatever you do to it.
Great theory. I think that's how No Driving Gloves looks at everything, with maybe the exception of Will. I've always said you can do whatever you want with whatever car, because we all had the equal opportunity to buy it. Maybe not the funds to it, we had the opportunity. And as long as it's not the last one on the planet, I'm going to forgive you. If it's the last one on the planet, I might change my words. But
yeah, right. But
so wait,
John,
where does this Lloyd fall? Because technically, it's the only one on the planet with this body. So where are you gonna fall on that?
Well, I kind of know what you're going to do to it. And once you get done with your Liberty Walk ground effects kit with it and a big wing on the back, that way we can picnic table on the on the deck lid. We'll be fine.
But that attitude, John, kind of ties back to you'd mentioned something about young enthusiasts and access to the hobby and stuff. And I'm gonna be the one dissenting old white guy in the hobby to say that there's just much enthusiasm out there for cars as there was when we were kids. I go to enough events to hear, oh, nobody cares. Young kids don't care about cars and stuff. I've started years ago when I first got into the Japanese end of the collecting hobby. I started attending these events, and you know what? They're predominantly 20 and 30-year-old kids doing stuff with Hondas, Toyotas, and Nissans that people in my generation were doing Fords and Chevys when we were young, and people of the generation before me were doing with Model A's and Model T's. So the fact that the younger enthusiasts may not love what you were raised with or what you're passionate about doesn't mean the enthusiasm isn't there. They may not come to Concours events, but they have these cruises like at 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight, and they're out in force and they're passionate. They work on their cars. And it's really refreshing to be involved with.
And that's what
Myron, I want to jump in real quick because Myron, I think you're a great example of the older generation that wants to see the passion in the younger generation and takes the time to be around the younger generation and encourage it. And I think there's two great examples of that in your life, and I know both of your daughters who are very, very passionate young women and love the car scene.
Yeah. Funny thing, about a year ago this time, I bought a car in Monterey called an Autech Zagato Stelvio. Right-hand drive, very low production. Basically a Nissan Leopard with a hand-built Zagato body. They only built 88 of those cars. I bought it in Monterey, had it shipped home. We left on vacation out of the country before it came home. So it came home, and before we got back, the girls had kind of, with our permission, hijacked the car, drove it to Detroit, won Best of Show at Radwood, and drove it back. So
yeah, and that's what we found with the show and various conversations is that kids are into cars. I mean, and I always, I guess, arrogantly use myself as an example because I did the mini truck scene. Then I did the hot rod Hondas and was one of the early dual overhead cam engine swap guys and all that to my CRX. Like I say, eventually matured and became a Lotus guy. And now I kind of respect all aspects of the car hobby. And that's where, Derek is. He's a pre-war guy, but he's at the Corvette Museum and he embraces everything. Will embraces everything. He prefers it to be a hot rod, but he does understand and he does have respect for everything. Sean loves his race cars and his sports cars, and that's how our hosts are. Is we love everything, and we don't want to sit here and preach Mopar and Ford or General Motors or Corvette you need to embrace everything, and it's nice to see you and someone of your age who's respecting the kids stepping into the hobby and not dismissing them. I've said for years, if you want kids to participate and play with you in the hobby, you got to listen to a little bit of their music, and we got to turn off the Beach Boys and maybe play some 9 Inch Nails or Dawes or something a little bit more modern for the kids, and then go back and play an Elvis tune. Start mixing it up and realize exactly what you said. The generation before you did it with T's and A's. You did it with tri-fi Chevys and muscle cars. And, my generation's done it with Hondas and everything, and now who knows where we're at. There's so much, and it's embracing, and that's why I love the car hobby. Is if you find a group you don't like or doesn't get along with you, you can always shift just a little bit. You're going to find a place to fit in. And we all should be welcoming. We shouldn't.
I just want to know when appreciating Lotus meant matures. You said you matured, became a Lotus.
Well, to my financial advisor, it really did, because after you put 20,000 into a CRX and you're able to sell it for 4, and you could get the same performance by putting 20,000 into a Lotus or 30,000 into a Lotus and sell it for 20,000 or 30,000, that's kind of maturing, at least with your financial portfolio. That once you understand depreciation, I think you've achieved a level of maturity in the car hobby.
One of my greatest disappointments was I lusted after a Lotus Europa forever. And finally came down. I found a beautiful twin cam, just beautifully done, super low mileage, well taken care of. And the guy actually brought it to my house, and I didn't fit. My legs were too long, my feet were too big. I tried for half an hour to get myself to fit into that car, and it just didn't work.
I actually had a 73 Lotus Europa twin cam and just loved that car. And I had a Caterham beside it, and one of the newer Elan M100s, the Isuzu Lotus, and each one had its thing. But I think the Europa actually performed and handled better than the 7. The 7 got all the attention because it's so crazy, going somewhere probably in your Excalibur. And the Elan M100 is just the practical one. Each one did its. I regretted having to sell the Europa when it did, but it went on to a better owner, and I sold it to him 12 years ago, and it's just coming out of his 12-year restoration. It'd be my dream Europa if there would be a way I could afford it now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's again, one of those things that we talk about on the show a lot, John, and Myron, kind of a great example of it. And some of the cars he owns that he's talked about is, to those getting into the hobby and that younger generation is, we're all kind of caretakers that are taking, well, that's kind of redundant, but caretakers that are having these cars in our collection, then eventually passing them on to the next caretaker. And, like Myron said, he's watched cars, the Polynesian in, most recently and most specifically, he watched that car as it was owned by people in the Ohio area. He knew about the car all his life. And eventually, it's now kind of his place to be the caretaker of it and treat it right. And then eventually it'll move on to another caretaker someday. And I think that's the thing that, one of the things you have to remember when you're getting into the hobby is, that you kind of, your passion is what kind of guides you in this. And, as you buy and sell the cars that you are passionate about and love, that, you're a caretaker of them. And, that's what this is all about. The passion of the car that you're taking care of and sharing its story until it passes along through history.
I had a questions kind of little off topic, Myron, for you. Researching the guest and learning a little bit about you before the show. You had appeared on Mark Green's podcast, Cars Yeah, which Derek was on just a few weeks ago, and I don't know how many times you've been on a show, whether or not it's once or whatever, but this is probably an appearance back in the early days of Cars Yeah, 2015, 2006.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
And he asked you a question, and it really caught me off guard because I keep trying to do this, but it's so big and it's enamoring when it sits on my desk. But he asked you your favorite book, and you maybe it's changed, but you brought up The Reckoning, and I think the idea behind The Reckoning's always appealed to me. But when I sit down with 800 pages of book, or at least my copy, I just start to read it. That's a little bit of history there, but it's kind of amazing history. And, I've never really known anybody else who knew the book, The Reckoning. I've always had to explain it. Can you go a little bit into that? Because it does overlap on, American JDM and U.S. cars and all of that.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. And frankly, I'm not a huge reader. That was just kind of, I think it was right around the time I was really kind of discovering the whole JDM culture and the importance of what happened in that period that really we were so much oblivious. And I think it was more of an enlightening thing for me than anything.
Yeah. Well, it basically is a book discussing how I can't remember which, but it takes the Ford business culture and the Nissan business culture and compares them and how alike they were, even though they were worlds apart, because we're talking pre-World War II with both management structure, how these companies, it's just, it's just one of those things that caught me off guard that, whoa, this appeared here.
Yeah. Well, again, I was just discovering the Japanese culture, and I was reading a lot of stuff about that. It was another book I read about the same time as this book that wasn't widely known, but it was about how the original Lexus LS, I think it was the Pursuit of Perfection or something like that, when the original Lexus LS was developed and how it was developed. And it was written by a gentleman who was with the Wall Street Journal at the time. And he was not a car guy, right? So it's just kind of behind the thing. But again, it just gave you really great insight as to the culture of the industry at that time. Which, you mentioned the reckoning. It's been interesting kind of following Nissan's plight, since then. I've ended up having some really good friends at Nissan, especially in the design area since, and watching the whole Carlos Ghosn thing develop and getting a little bit of the inside view and stuff. It's a lot of fun.
And you bring up the development, the Pursuit of Perfection, and I'm one of these huge fans of the early Lexus LS. My dad had a '93, great car. I've got a guy that hangs out with me all the time. He's had his LSs, and both of us would love to go back and get, one of the mid '90s LS 400s again, or a 430. Great cars. But Malcolm Gladwell, a podcaster, he did a special, him and Pushkin Industries. I'm sure this was paid for by Lexus, but the development, I think, of the new Lexus RX 500. I haven't finished the podcast. I'm not sure which car, but it's one of the convertible Lexus, and all the different Japanese design theories and culture theories stuff. So far, it's been a great podcast. It's only 6 episodes long, but, not to put you back into the JDM stuff, Myron, but if any of our listeners, it's how I find podcasts when podcasts recommend podcasts. So, if you can tolerate Malcolm, it's a good podcast.
Yeah, I'm still, again, we're just wrapping up the book. So I'm deep into the minutia. I woke up at 6 o'clock this morning and wrote for 4 hours. I wrote captions about obscure Mitsubishi car photographs. So it's we're pretty deep into that stuff. But you look at the design. One of the interesting things that you don't realize is that the use of the Japanese of great Italian designers. Especially in the early '60s up into the early '70s. People go through my garage and they say, "Wow, that car is really beautiful. What is it?" And I'll say, "It's a Mazda, or it's an Isuzu." You mentioned. I just sold my Isuzu 117 Coupe, which is really, one of the most beautiful Giugiaro designs of all time. It's really like a 2/3 scale Fiat Dino Coupe, and it was his first clean sheet design at Ghia right after he'd left Bertone. So it's really great stuff out there. And then conversely, I have a first generation Nissan Silvia CSP 311, which was a hand built car that Albrecht von Goertz has been taking credit for since day one, but was really in digging and reading and researching for the book. We find that it was done totally internally, and the two designers are still alive and on a consulting basis with Nissan. So, the history is a fun part of the hobby.
I think the research is the most enjoyable portion of the car hobby. That's what I always enjoyed in the restoration, is researching and figuring out and theorizing and proving yourself right or wrong. It's just, that was what I enjoyed the most, restoration. That's what I enjoyed most with the, doing when I do collector car consulting, just figuring out the research and trying to prove theories right or just learning.
Yeah. And I think that's, being again in the collections world, in the museums and the curatorial, it's one of the things that I find most interesting in the car hobby as well, is the research. And even if you think you have a car that, everybody knows everything about it. I mean, in the Corvette world, the Corvette is a modern vehicle by most standards, and started in 1953. But there's still a lot of mysteries to be researched within the designs, the engineering of it, that the stories aren't always told. So then you get into stories like the cars that Myron has in his collection, and these odd cars that, the Japanese cars and things like that. The research can suck you in, and the cool thing is you really get to learn almost in some ways, more about the car than if you were just out in the garage wrenching on it. I know that seems like a pretty easy statement to understand, but wrenching on it is one thing, but learning that history and to me, understanding the mindset of the people that engineered it and designed it, it tells you so much more about, the car itself. And even when you go to work on it, understanding how to work on the car and, really why it is built the way it is.
But then, and then the other benefit of having unique, one-off and low production cars, though, is, sometimes you just can't find that information. And we were showing one of our cars at Pebble Beach, maybe 10 years ago, not quite 10 years ago. And again, my friend who works on the cars for me was there with me. And, I was in the back of the car talking, he was in the front, whatever. And someone had asked him this question that we just didn't know. I mean, it's something crazy. And a light went off in his brain. He said, you know what? I can tell him anything I want because nobody's here to prove me wrong. So,
and that.
Go ahead, Derek.
Well, I was going to say that brought up one other thing that was on my mind, when knowing that we were going to be talking with Myron tonight, which is, of course, Myron, as he said, in his day life, he ran country clubs, and at one of the country clubs he was heavily involved with, ran a great concours, the Glenmore Gathering in Akron, Ohio there. And that was always a great one to attend and go to. And, but Myron, your take on, basically the situation this year, the lack of the shows that are going on in the car community and car culture. Of course, we just passed Car Week at Pebble Beach. Pebble Beach would have been this past Sunday. And of course, Myron, you're a regular out at Pebble Beach frequently, let's say, out at the concours, and whether you're showing a car or even just there to hang out and see cars. But kind of your take on everything that's going on in the car community this year, and how we're going to bounce back next year, and really what I think are going to be phenomenal shows next year, because we've missed a year of getting together and seeing all those people we usually get to see at these shows.
I think it's more of the world issue as opposed to a car issue, right? The world has changed, and it's changed. I can't say it's changed for better, but it's changed for good. And I don't think anybody can really project, what's going to happen. I think there is a pent up demand for car events. I see the local cars and coffee events like in Cleveland, again, some of these younger car events, these late night things, the turnouts are huge, almost too big, unfortunately, because there's just no way to safely do these things, but they're pop-up events and they're spontaneous, and a lot of people are looking for something to do. I don't know if the events, I really can't say. I think just like, all these projections that people say that 30% or 40% of the private restaurants are going to be closing because people have learned to enjoy cooking home and staying home. I think it's going to change events as a whole. And I think, again, the whole COVID thing is really an economic issue. And it really depends on not turn into a political decision, but see the discussion, but see where our country ends up from here. That's going to not only determine the car shows of the future, but how we live our lives. So I don't know. I think some things will disappear forever as a result, and we may see some new things that we haven't seen before. But I think it hasn't. It definitely, the enthusiasm hasn't been hurt by it. We have good friends at Summit Racing. They're our neighbors. We're near our shop. And I think they and pretty much any other auto parts supplier have had like a banner 3 or 4 months mail ordering parts for people that have been home that haven't had time to work on their cars. So there'll be some really cool stuff coming out. Whether it'll come out in traditional venues or a new type of venue, I think we'll just have to wait and see.
What were you going to say, John? I know you had something to say before I interrupt.
Nope. I was waiting for you. I was just it's going to definitely be a different year when it comes to car shows and that. I've always been a slight optimistic pessimist, and I'm sure we're going to get back to some of them. Unfortunately, we're going to lose some of them. I think there's going to be rethinking, and we're probably going to come out with some better events. My doomsday projection, though, is technically it might be Pebble next year where we start rejoining and this stuff begins, because until we get, and everybody keeps clamoring for a vaccine, I keep saying we need a treatment. We need to figure out how to make everybody who's sick better, and then we can figure out how to prevent everybody. Because people with vaccines, people still get sick in that. We need to come up, once we have a medical remedy to this, we're going, events will begin to slowly take place. But it's not like if they announced on Monday that we have a vaccine or a treatment, all of a sudden events are going to start the following Friday. It's going to take a while for the world to be treated and everybody to become accustomed to people again, because frankly, I'm a little bit of a hermit and I'm kind of liking. It's definitely going to be a different world. Everything's going to be interesting. As the meme says on Facebook, though, when we go to SEMA next year, there's not going to be any of those chicken bleep welds on cars and that. Everything should be absolutely perfect because everybody's had 2 years or at least more than a year to get everything done.
13 months. Yeah, absolutely.
And some people are going to have had 25, we'll say. But, so they're like I think Will said, no Bluetooth drive shafts, and everything should run and drive in there, and calipers shouldn't be put on backwards and all that fun stuff. But I've got one more question for you, Myron. We're well over an hour here, and but I think the conversation's been worth it in time investment. You have 75-ish cars. How many cars do you think you've owned in your few years?
I know I quit tallying around 400.
And see, that makes me feel good because I'm at about like 57 and I'm 48. So it's 2 cars a year or of my driving life or so. And people think that's a number. I like hearing 400. That works for me.
I don't even know if I've broken 15 yet. I got a long ways to go.
I'll say the other day when they were talking about it on my personal Facebook page, and there was a big car guy or a car guy that I knew in high school, and I found out he's only had like 6. He had a couple really hot cars in high school, and then after high school, he might be at 7 now because he just recently bought a new pickup. But it's interesting. If with a little bit better parenting, since my dad was this, I wouldn't have had that. But too late, he can't do anything. Who did we drop? Did Derek go away again?
No, looks like we lost Myron that time.
Ooh.
Hope he didn't just get bored with us.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll wait, give him a minute here, Derek, to come back. I'll edit all this. If he doesn't come back, we'll lose the show.
All right. One final question for him, and now we're not going to be able to ask it. And seeing he's an avid listener to the show, he'll know it's coming.
Yeah, one of the entries we got for the magazine, they commented on the quality of the show.
That it was good or bad?
Good.
Oh, good. Hey, Myron, you back?
I'm back with voice. Doesn't look like that. The computer's on the. I don't know what happened on my phone. It just knocked me out.
I think it's Zoom.
Yeah, it's a couple of technical issues tonight. I don't know how to figure out, so we'll just live with it. We're going to kind of just pretend where you dropped was a decent place. We'll go ahead, and Derek's going to do one more question or something, and then we're just going to go ahead and exit.
Yeah. So, well, Myron, it's been great having you on the show. But I know you're a listener of the podcast, No Driving Gloves. So hopefully you know the last question that's coming your way. And I mean, that is, when are you going to add a Zamboni to the collection?
You know what? In my old age, I've come to hate ice and cold and all the other stuff. So, yeah. Someone sent me a Porsche-powered ski slope grooming machine about a year or so ago, which, about 10 years ago, I'd have probably been all over. I already have a Porsche 356 powered ski lift mechanism. But anything that has to do with ice or cold at this point is I'm automatically out.
Yet you still live in Ohio.
Well, you know what? That's much more my wife's decision than mine. Plus, I have this noose of about 70 cars around my neck.
Well, I was going to say, I just want to have the friends that are going to just send me Porsche ice groomings, or I don't even have people that'll send me a Porsche Matchbox car. So, we do thank you for being a listener, Myron, and we do thank you for joining us on the podcast and telling us a little bit about your cars. I'll let Derek do the complete wind up, but I just want to say I've learned a lot. Now I'm probably going to have to go back to Jalopnik and read all your posts over the last 7 or 8.
Well, you're going to have to go past that. I was one of the early guys on Jalopnik way back when. So you have to go back.
Back when I called it Jalopnik.
But no,
Myron,
it's been my pleasure to be on. I appreciate you guys having me. I love your podcast. I don't listen to a lot of automotive podcasts, but yours I listen to pretty much as it drops every week, and I appreciate it. And, thanks for including me with your group of guests who generally are much more esteemed than I am. And I hope I didn't bore your listeners too much with esoteric details of cars nobody cares about.
I doubt you did, Myron. Everything. I mean, it's fascinating to hear the stories, and I think the listeners we know that we have are going to probably love this episode and hearing about these quirky cars that you have in the collection, and they'll probably go in and start doing research on the cars, and like John said, going back to Jalopnik and looking up your stories and all that about your collections. So I do want to give you a chance, Myron. I don't know if you want to, and we can edit this out if it need be, but I don't know if you wanted to, give out any, I know you post a lot of things on some social media. If you wanted to, give any of your social media names out, if people want to follow you to learn more about the cars.
Yeah, I think on Instagram, I'm Junkman356. And Twitter, just Myron Vernis, spelled the way you'd normally spell Myron Vernis. And I think on Facebook, Mobilia Garage is kind of what I have for the cars in the collection. So that's it. I don't do Facebook a whole heck of a lot, but I try to post a couple times a day, wacky cars that I see in traffic or in the garage on Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Myron. And of course, for everybody listening, check out No Driving Gloves on all our social media. John, I'm going to let you wrap it up because I never remember every social media account we have, and you're much better at it.
No, that's why we have the nice pre-canned our outro now, just telling you to go to the website, nodrivinggloves.com.
Oh, I got to listen to the new outro.
Yeah.
Man.
And everything's there. And we've now added, because basically I decided Patreon was, I don't want to ask you guys to commit $5 or $10 a month to us. But when you hear an episode and you really like it, go to the website, click buy us a coffee, and it'll take you to buymeacoffee.com. And you can chip in a couple of bucks every now and then, and we'll randomly give gifts and that for anybody who buys us coffee, whether it's stickers, magnets, T-shirts, whatever latest promo stuff we might have. Things laying around that we have that are car oriented, just random stuff. Not everybody will win, but you can't win if you don't play. So check us out, buymeacoffee.com, No Driving Glove. With that, I'm out of here. Thank you, Myron, for your time this evening. We look forward to maybe with you again.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Myron. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening, and remember to look us up at nodrivinggloves.com. There you can find back episodes, links to products we recommend, and links to all of our social media. Be sure to tell a friend about us. No Driving Gloves is edited and produced by J. Lewis Productions.